get this at the crossroads of all these points, and we're bringing a multimodal approach in our thinking, and we're mode agnostic. This is not about, is rail better than roads? Are buses better than trains? This is about what are the needs that we have in this metro area, and what's the best fit to address the problem. Key to our strategy is our express lanes, and the state is doubling down. So I'm sure you recognize there, I'm sure many of you were in traffic around these roadways. But going back to 2011, we opened the I-85 hot lanes. And it was very controversial. It was a conversion of a lane, but based on its popularity and use today, where we see as high as 37,000 trips per day using that hot lane or Peach Pass lane. We're at 9.9 million trips per year in that lane. Put that in context, that 37,000 per day, when it first opened in 2011, 7,500 trips per day. So people are using these lanes. So we've doubled down on that investment. In 2017, we opened the I-75 South lanes. We're seeing approximately 3 million trips per year occurring in those lanes. We quickly followed that up in 2018 with the Northwest Corridor. Some people on the internet call it the toller coaster. This project is, I've received anonymous social media comments that are positive. I work in government, and on Twitter, I'm getting positive comments. I really should have quit my job then, because it's all downhill from there. But again, people are getting to see how this can help better move people around. People are talking about get back to their family. They can get to their kids' soccer practices on time. And for transit, we had a problem. We had to go out for public comment. We had to change all the schedules because those buses were arriving too early. We weren't keeping the schedules. On average, 15 minutes earlier. So we had to actually go back in and change all the schedules. So this is working for those vehicles that are paying tolls, but also for the public transit component. And then also in 2018, we extended the I-85 hot lanes another 10 miles. So look at that number, 66.7 centerline miles. In less than 10 years, the state of Georgia has deployed these express lanes. People are using them, and we've surpassed our existing heavy rail network with these lanes, which are really multimodal corridors. I'm going to come back to rail because this is not saying this is better than that. This is a new option as we continue to look at how we're going to better move people as part of a cohesive system. Next, in 2027, we plan to open up Georgia 400, but we're not stopping there. The entire top upper hemisphere of 285 is slated to receive express lanes, and it's going to be a domino effect from when we open Georgia 400, opening additional components of this system, because that's what it is, really over the next approximately 10-year period. I already told you we're working on 400 next. So why are we doing this? Well, we're going for more reliable travel times, more consistent speeds, but this is also a multimodal investment. We're trying to improve how transit works. As a state, we passed a public policy that transit gets to utilize these for free. So those who can or choose to pay the tolls get the benefits, but transit will as well. And we're not stopping there. This year, we passed over 1 million vehicles in this state have Peach Passes on them. So if I already convinced you to put this ugly-looking Band-Aid thing in your window, are there other value adds or benefits that we can bring? So we're partnering with Hartsfield-Jackson, the world's busiest airport, and by the fall of next year, you'll be able to go into their newest parking deck, and if you have a Peach Pass, you'll just drive in. And when you're leaving, you'll just drive out. You're already running late. You don't want to fumble looking for a ticket and finding that credit card. Was that the one I put in the beginning? Just drive in and drive out. So we'll be introducing this, what we're calling Peach Pass Plus. We're also working with Stone Mountain Park to also look at doing something up there. So this is just a hint at some of the things that we're working on. And really the takeaway is we're taking a multimodal approach, and what we're doing now is let's stop talking first about whether we like this train or we like this bus or we like this particular option. Let's look at the demands in the area and what's the best tool to fit. And that's what my job largely is, working with our partners at DOT and MARTA and others to put the right solution in place to best help move people around this region. So thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Brett Harrell. I'm from Gwinnett County. First was introduced to the Public Policy Foundation in the late 1990s, and have found this organization a great resource for me throughout my time in public life. The research and the data produced by Georgia Public Policy Foundation has been the foundation for many issues that I've campaigned on or legislated on since that time. My background is I first got involved in public life at the local level as a city council member, and then became the mayor of Snellville in Gwinnett County and served a term there. Became very interested in transportation issues as the mayor of a growing community in the state of Georgia, and began meeting many transportation partners during that time in office. At the end of my term as mayor, I chose not to run for re-election, and I served as executive director of a community improvement district for the next 5 years, also focused on transportation initiatives and transportation projects, growing the group of partners that I worked with in that space, in that environment, and continuing my education there at the community improvement district. And then leaving there, I had an opportunity to run for the legislature, and the citizens in my community were kind enough to allow me to represent them at the State House, where I've completed 9 years. During my tenure there, I've served on the Transportation Committee the entire time, and have served with some wonderful leaders, and again was able to broaden my knowledge and experience in transportation issues through my service on the Transportation Committee and the Georgia House. My focus has also switched recently more toward taxation. I chair the Ways and Means Committee, so I do spend most of my time currently on tax issues, which are very relevant to transportation as well. Before I make a few comments, let me just say that I'm so excited about the future of our state in the area of transportation, and Chris Tomlinson is absolutely the right person to serve in the role that he's serving in. I was very excited to hear more about what he's doing and what the organizations he's leading. The types of things he shared with you this morning are not always been the types of things we've heard from our transportation leaders in Georgia in years past. So I have been, over my tenure involved in public life, been very, very focused on, as you heard Chris suggest, serving our communities and serving our citizens. Outstanding innovation in transportation today and going forward that makes me very excited about the future in Georgia. One of our sponsors today, the rideshare company Lyft, a totally disruptive new technology. People like me, I rarely used a traditional taxi in years past, but the rideshare companies and the innovation they've provided have really been a paradigm shift in that. So they've taken a tremendous amount of business in that space for people that paid for transportation services, but they've also grown the pie dramatically of people that use that type of service. So as someone that rarely used a traditional taxi service, I use the rideshare companies weekly. And it has been a great expansion and innovation in that space. And the reason I do, and I think the reason more and more people do, is it provides those core benefits to the citizen. Flexibility, choice, you set your own schedule, your own time, the point of access, the point of departure. These are all critical components of a successful transportation system that I think rideshare is addressing those needs very well and will continue to do so in the future. you heard mentioned a little bit about another coming technology, autonomous vehicles. Chairman Tanner, who chairs the House Transportation Committee, kindly allowed me to chair a subcommittee on autonomous vehicles a couple years ago, and we kind of laid out the framework as how that technology will be introduced into Georgia, and I'm very excited about the future potential there. And we're probably still a number of years away, but the potential benefits there for autonomous vehicles, again, over the spectrum of people that could take advantage of their transportation services is immense. Again, flexibility, choice, mobility. Think about even people that are aging out of the point of wanting to drive or own their own car, or people with certain disabilities. Then, autonomous vehicles addresses many of those issues, or the potential to address many of those issues going forward too. These technologies providing that last mile connectivity with more traditional types of transportation services is exciting, and I think an opportunity that we should build upon and look forward to. Georgia recently, over the last several years, has proven from the state level our commitment to this core government service, which is transportation. So I'm a person that believes that it is one of the areas that the government has a core responsibility for investing in and providing. We first did it several years ago with, you may be familiar with House Bill 170, which effectively doubled our spending from the Department of Transportation on these issues. So Georgia DOT previously spent around $1 billion a year. Now we're investing roughly $2 billion a year on various transportation projects in the state of Georgia. For someone like me who is a fiscal conservative, so somebody like me that is very mindful of how we spend your tax dollars, I will tell you House Bill 170 was a tax increase from the first day it was introduced through the entire debate to the last moment of its passage and the sign into law, and I supported it the entire way. Again, it's a core function of government, transportation, a function of government that your tax dollars rightly are invested in. So I was very pleased to support that particular measure. Our Chairman Tanner now has another initiative that I think is worthy of discussion and debate. It's House Bill 511, and if you take away for a moment discussion on the various alphabet soup of agencies, and Mr. Tomlin represents, as you see, 3 of them, take that out of the discussion for a moment. The remainder of the bill really talks about public transit throughout our state. So 180 maybe transit agencies around Georgia. So I think when we use the term transit, at least when I hear the term transit, that doesn't mean simply a rail line or a train for me. I mean, there are public transit happens in all sorts of ways throughout our state, all sorts of shapes, sizes, and forms. And this is an innovative idea that would put state funding toward projects that are designed locally to meet local needs. And I think that's, the old cliche, insanity is doing the same thing the way we always have and expect a different result. So I think some of the things you're seeing come forward, which are exciting, are looking to do things differently than we have done in the past, so that when we expect a different result, we may be more likely to achieve it. We had a project in that bill. There's a number of pilot projects that would be funded too. My county, Gwinnett County, last year was running a pilot project that I was very excited about. It was very well received. We basically had a series of micro buses, maybe 12, 15 passenger buses. And the county had an app on your phone, which so many people are dependent on their phones today. And you could schedule one of these micro buses to pick you up wherever, whether it be your home, your office, or whatever, and take you to the destination of your choice and schedule your return trip too. Again, I think, and most of us probably, hopefully would agree, I mean, we want to have that flexibility, that choice in mobility, that choice in transportation that allows us to do our jobs, to take care of our families, and do it in a manner that's most fitting our schedule, rather than being forced into a schedule determined by some other agency or department. So that pilot program has ended. I think the results were very successful. I think the county has a desire to start it up again and hopefully expand it. I think it fits very well with the planning that Mr. Tomlinson discussed going on at the ATL. I'm a supporter of that concept as well. So the ATL that would get a uniform branding, a uniform cooperation between our regional partners. So again, the citizen, the transit rider, has a more seamless trip, has less hassle, if you will, on making the reservations on the trip, on paying for the trip, on determining the entry and exit points on the trip. So I think those are all very positive aspects of the new planning organization that's being done under the ATL umbrella. And if you think, especially in Metro Atlanta, we are a worldwide destination for travelers. And the travel industry and the hospitality industry is very important for our state, and especially in Metro Atlanta. And so for that person that's coming to our state that is unfamiliar with 159 counties and 545 cities and 180 transit systems, the ability to see a more uniform brand, I think, pays benefit in that arena that's even broader than just transportation, but it's hospitality and it's travel and tourism and showing a stronger brand for the state of Georgia as well. So that's encouraging for me too. So I look forward to your questions. I will mention briefly, I was asked to kind of mention a referendum we had last year in my county in Gwinnett. There was a ballot question on whether Gwinnett County should enter into a contract with MARTA. And let me say I have no issue with MARTA being an operational entity of many of our transit programs. But that initiative failed in Gwinnett County at the ballot box. I did not support the initiative myself, so I was obviously pleased with the outcome. But to share with you the reasons why I believe that particular initiative failed, it was much like a SPLOST type vote, where the citizens were presented with a proposed tax over a period of time and a list of projects of what they would receive for that tax. And those that went to the polls quite simply didn't see value exceeding the investment they would be making. Much of it was invested in a single project. Much of the revenue raised to that tax was invested in a single project. And Gwinnett is a large county, both from a standpoint of square miles as well as a growing population. And I think many people simply did not see that investment benefiting their community, their part of the county, significantly enough to support it. Interestingly enough, in my House district, I'm in South Gwinnett County, the bulk of this money was spent up on I-85 coming from Doraville up to Jimmy Carter Boulevard. But and it contained a significant heavy rail project or heavy rail line extension as part of that. But in my part of the county, in the south part of the county, in my House district, I had voters of every demographic, whether it be economic, whether it be race, whether it be gender, vote in opposition to the measure. So it really was, I think, the citizens looking at the proposal before them, and like many SPLOST votes we've seen, if you show the citizens a good return on their investment, you show them a project list that gives value, I think most often and time again, you'll see a citizen, in many cases, is willing to support such a measure. But in this case, I think the measure was not successful primarily for those reasons. I personally also prefer, going forward, that my county work within the ATL framework on planning projects going forward. And so I think by taking a pause and not entering into this contract at that time over the long term serves Gwinnett well. So the defeat of that particular referendum is not a defeat for the county. It is not an end to investment in transportation in Gwinnett. It doesn't say Gwinnett is not going to be a partner with the region and other agencies going forward. It just simply says we've got to continue to look at ways to provide transportation alternatives to the citizens throughout our state in a means that meets their needs and meets the demands that they have, and to the best of our ability is affordable for those citizens to make use of that transportation system. So with that, I appreciate y'all having me this morning. I look forward to questions.
All right, again, if you would, fill out those cards and we'll get them collected so we can have some questions from you all. I've got a couple of questions to start us off. And Brett, you mentioned MARTA, but I'll voice this question to Chris. Chris, tell us how the alphabet soup you've got there relates to MARTA, and why aren't you running MARTA?
Oh, okay. The first part's the easier one. So part of the reason that we've actually tried to organize and really, let's call it what it is, streamline at the state level, is taking the alphabet soup of agencies and servicing those needs with one organization. And it's made just setting up meetings between MARTA or GDOT much easier. But how it relates to MARTA, I also sit on the board of MARTA as a non-voting member, and it's really about coordinating. So however you look at this region, that MARTA system provides a core backbone transit system in the central core of the region. And it's really about what can we do, what should we do at the state level to be supportive of key investments or developments or projects that they're working on. And then it gets back to what Brett was saying. It's how do we best connect? I think Brett brings up some very interesting points in that when it came to the referendum, there were times when I felt like people didn't realize that Gwinnett has either the second or third largest transit system in existence already. And so, regardless of how individual voters felt, there are different ways to look at either expanding or enhancing the connections to MARTA, both as part of the MARTA system or without it, because there's connections today. So my job is to make sure that as we continue to look at investments throughout the region, and because Gwinnett is independent from MARTA, has put together a pretty robust transit plan, which I actually applaud the county for continuing to engage the citizens on it, because transit is a local issue. And so, but as we look at these investments, and Gwinnett is doing things regardless or post the referendum, how do we make this a seamless network so we simplify and make it easy for people to get from one point to another? Because our commutes and our trips don't start or end neatly at county jurisdictional lines. So my job is to help bring that regional view and to move beyond the borders of any one operator or jurisdiction to help us have a comprehensive network. And on the last part,
I was going to let you slide on that, but go ahead.
Well, on the last part, I actually like the role that I get to play being at the crossroads. Whoever's running MARTA, and it's Jeff Parker, and I've known him for years, they have to focus on running that operational entity. And operations tends to consume a lot of time and energy. I'm hoping to bring that similar time and energy to the planning piece and not have it just evolve around the operations of the borders of what is clearly the largest by far. But there's a lot of other things happening in this region. So,
good point, great point. So, Brett, you mentioned Lyft and other rideshare services. Now, those services essentially I won't say gutted, but they've put a big dent in what was a government-controlled monopoly, because limousine services, taxi services were all PSC regulated and still are. So philosophically, where do you see a line of what should be privatized and what should be public? How do you see things evolving?
Well, as we've talked earlier this morning, and you will this afternoon, technology, innovation, you heard the Lieutenant Governor start it, is just changing our entire world in every aspect of our lives, whether it's delivering healthcare or transportation or how you get your groceries. People, are just, that phone in your pocket is more powerful than the computers that landed the first space rocket on the moon. And so it's amazing how our world is changing. Me personal, and maybe I should do this disclaimer now, I'm speaking, my comments here are just, one man's opinion. I don't speak for the House or the administration or any other elected official. Personally, when the private marketplace can provide a service that meets the need of the consumers, that is always my preference. So, and the marketplace always changes faster than government. We're always responding to the marketplace. We're always responding to consumers. And sometimes the delay in our response hampers innovation in the marketplace. So we have to do our best to be more mindful in seeing those changes coming and respond quicker. But, I off the top of my head, I can't think of very many issues where I would default and say, no, government needs to maintain complete control of a particular activity. We have even, in Georgia, again, innovation down in Camden. We have a group launching a new industry in Georgia with the Camden Spaceport. Now, who knows how that may play out, but basically it's a partnership with government and private sector to allow private sector companies to come in this space and deploy various types of satellites. Again, going back to shopping, the consumers are demanding, product delivered to their home in a time frame that's, changing that marketplace. 3% of grocery shopping now is being delivered. Japan, it's 15%. So there's still great growth opportunity there. And when you think about delivery, whether it's delivering a transportation service or your groceries, we've got to think about what is next. Georgia is moving into a new industry with medical cannabis oil. So I visited an integrated facility up in Boston recently that everything from grows the plant to makes the oil to provides home delivery. And you think about a single parent with a seizing child, the last thing they've got time to do is put that kid in a car seat and go to a pharmacy and fill a prescription. So, we've got to look, so a brand new industry in Georgia we've never had before, but how is it ultimately going to get to the consumer? And we've got to address that. And it's the same is true with transportation. The options and how you get that customer from point A to point B. And whenever the private sector can be a significant player in that or the only player, then that more often than not would be my preferred method.
Gotcha. So we have some questions from the audience.
Can I add one
Yeah,
thing?
by all means, go right ahead.
These transportation network companies, Lyft, Uber, I agree with everything that Representative Harrell said. We are trying to find ways to create an environment to allow the private sector to innovate. So the ATL will be releasing an annual report and audit of transit in this region. It's due to the legislature December 1. And what you're going to see is over the past 5 years, a dip in the number of trips on public transit, and it corresponds with the rise of Lyft and Uber and scooters. There's some people, and I personally think it's older thinking, oh, well, that's a threat to public transit. No, we need to recognize that these things have grown virally and people are using them. So how do we incorporate it in and allow them to innovate? We're looking at mobile apps, and we're hoping to get a grant to do something. But even if we don't receive the grant, allowing the private sector by providing safely and securely data so the private sector can build the apps, because I can't keep up with all the different iPhones that come out They're not going to give me a budget to keep buying them and testing on it. But what we can do is provide information in near real time about tolls and the number of trips and where our buses are, and let someone who has a for-profit business model constantly innovate to provide this information to the citizens. So you're going to see more and more of this type of public-private partnership.
Gotcha. No, well said, well said. So, you know, I'm with the Georgia Motor Trucking Association, so I should have made it clear to the audience that we don't do railroad questions. All right. But unfortunately, our first question is, does Georgia have room financially or geographically for heavy rail expansion? Anybody want to tackle that? Okay, the audience has answered the question.
I'll be happy to talk about it. I think that in terms of seeing a large portfolio of heavy rail project, it's not realistic. The cost of heavy rail now is approaching approximately around $400 million per mile. That being said, this goes back to what I said about being mode agnostic. There may be certain situations where that still makes the most sense. The Clifton Corridor project, trying to provide better connectivity into the Emory CDC campus, that business community has done an incredible job of shuttles and shared rides, et cetera, and they still have problems. Those historical, narrow, windy streets doesn't really give us a lot of options for doing things on the road, and there happens to be some rail lines, and that might not be, in fact, it's likely not to be heavy rail, it may be light rail, but it just goes to show there may be some instances where that makes sense, but it's not all or nothing.
And Ed, I would add too, I think from the things you've heard us discuss about consumer choice and flexibility, any kind of fixed guideway, in my estimation, reduces that, because you have no choice but to enter at point A and exit at point B, and there's no flexibility between the 2 points. I think second, I would say too, all these systems it's just a rail line in the car, it's a machine. And are we using the machine to maximum capacity? And I would suggest no. So where the machines are operating today, largely in Metro Atlanta, we don't have the density at along existing transit lines that maximizes the benefit from this machine that we've invested in and put in place. So I would suggest that density needs to rise there to maximize the capacity and utilization prior to looking at expansion of, as Mr. Tomlinson said, a very expensive investment. And we can see the private sector confirming that by looking at private sector innovative companies, like the rideshare companies, that are making decisions to enter or leave markets based on density. Some of the rideshare companies and some of the scooters that are on the streets right now in our city today are going to be leaving for markets that are more dense and have higher ridership levels, because as a private innovative company, they recognize that's a capital investment in a machine that they're not maximizing return on investment in. And so I think if we look at that, that'll give us some indication of whether or not the heavier rail or any kind of fixed guideway is a good investment going forward.
Well, and that's a great point, because obviously getting back on the road side, one of the perceived benefits of all the automation efforts that are being undertaken is increasing the actual density and throughput on the existing road systems to make them more efficient. You know, as the cars talk to each other, they can move more closely together without causing problems, without causing traffic jams or incidents. So here's a couple, Chris, that are really targeted at you. It's all about the Peach Pass. One part of it is, all right, you mentioned the Hartsfield-Jackson parking area. Have you considered, or are you working on doing anything with private providers? That is, could you go to one of the other Park and Flies or Peach, parking and all that, and do the same thing?
The short answer is yes. And in our infinite wisdom, we just decided to start with the world's busiest airport instead of something smaller. Now, you are going to see us rolling out, again, this concept called Peach Pass Plus, where you can opt in for other services, and maybe it's parking garages by simply driving in. And we're not just doing this because we think it's something neat or interesting to do. It's part of our strategy to get people to get Peach Passes in their vehicles prior to these express lanes opening. It's a U.S. phenomenon. We procrastinate. The roads open, and then people flood us to try to sign up then and there. So if we can increase the value proposition. But some of our partners are doing things with private parking, car washes, et cetera. So as we develop this program, we'll be able to interface with others.
Terrific. Related to that, are you working on interoperability with the Easy Pass up north or other toll systems?
I've been working on interoperability with Easy Pass for the last 5 years. If you saw my bio picture, none of this was gray. Sometimes it's like negotiating with Tony Soprano. We have the capabilities to read the Easy Pass in Georgia today. What we're working on is having them upgrade their systems to read the Peach Pass up there. And it's a real problem. They have, I think 8,000 readers in their system, so it's not an easy upgrade. But eventually, either through that or through license plate reader technology, we will achieve it.
Okay, great. So here's another one. This may tend more towards you, Brett. Are sales tax referendums, for instance, IT SPLOST or T-SPLOST, the best way long-term for locals to have a reliable funding source going forward?
Are sales tax referendum the best way for local governments to have a transportation funding source going forward?
That's what I think it says.
Okay, world according to Brett. Yeah. First of all, SPLOSTs were originally designed to be short-term, 5 or 6 years, and then terminate, potentially. And like most creations of government and most taxes, in most cases, they just renew. And they continue on and on and on. And sometimes we haven't delivered exactly what was on the schedule of projects that were voted in favor of. And so at the end of the term, money lapses or what have you. But I think that the local governments keep in mind their primary revenue source is property taxation, which is the most hated form of taxation by most accounts. Local governments in Georgia cannot levy an income tax, thank goodness. So I think in many cases the consumption tax, the sales tax, is their most significant opportunity to provide additional services to their community, whether it be transportation or other capital investments. And again, at the end of the day, arguably it is a choice, a tax of choice. I mean, you have to eat, right? You have to put gas in your vehicle or pay the toll on the bus or the train. But many of those decisions are discretionary decisions that are funded through the tax. I think significant transportation projects, though, really are much larger than a city or even a county. They really do become state level and planning and coordination, and even the bigger projects, obviously, the national highway system. So that's where it kind of comes back to the comment I made earlier. Transportation is one of those, in my words, few core services that government ought to provide. I don't know of a better alternative to suggest.
Okay, sounds good. So Chris, let me come back to you. So can you tell us a little, overall, how do you see this impacting the economy, the work you do? Do you get to quantify that at all?
Yes, so we're, again, in this report coming out December 1, you're going to see some of the economic impact, especially that on the transit side that it has, both in terms of the transit as a sector. How many people are in that industry? The answer is around 12,000. How much they bring home in income and what their collective spend is, which is, if I remember correctly, is about 1.8 billion. But also, we're trying to document what are the workers, it's about 4% in this region that commute, what are they contributing to the GDP? So we'll have some of that information. But I think on a broader level, working with the Department of Economic Development, companies that are looking at choosing Atlanta for their sites are asking about our transportation network, and this is factoring into the decisions. Senator Beach often is quoted as pointing out that Mercedes-Benz and State Farm, two companies where the automobile is central to their business models, chose sites because of their proximity to transit. So having good answers about what we're doing across the entire transportation spectrum, roads, transit, et cetera, are sort of key to landing these companies.
Gotcha. All right, we've only got a couple minutes left, and we've focused a lot on transit and things like that. We haven't talked at all about freight mobility. So I know we have the proposed truck-only lanes, obviously a GDOT project, but any thoughts or any comments on that, either one of you, or freight mobility generally? There's a lot of studying going on right now.
Well, I just read, and as I mentioned to you earlier, Ed, the Georgia Port, October, hit another all-time record. It looks like the growth there is going to continue, which means that freight coming out of that, which is good for all of Georgia, which is good for our state economy, is going to continue to explode. So I know Chairman Tanner and the Senate Transportation Committee and others are looking at freight and logistics. I have not been engaged in that myself recently, but it is critically important, and we have to get a plan in place that allows freight the more guaranteed trip times that we're looking at on express lanes in Metro Atlanta for passengers to move product and goods as well. So whether they be managed lanes or freight only or voluntary lanes, I think is something that we can still discuss. But to provide alternatives for that freight to circumvent coming through inside the perimeter and coming through downtown to reach their final destination, I think is critically important. We've seen tremendous success with these inland ports. And I know there was at some point there was resistance to communities to putting an inland port in their area, but I think it's proving very quickly to be a success for our freight in logistics. And again, as I mentioned, sometimes it's public perception. Going back to my days as mayor, and I mentioned this to Ed earlier too, we had many in our community that were just tired of the big trucks. Get the trucks off the road. Mayor, you got to do something. Our main intersection, we did a traffic count for a period of time, and it turned out on any 24-hour period at the center of Snellville, at the main intersection, the intersection of two, a U.S. and a state highway, that about 3% of the vehicles going through that intersection were 18-wheel trucks. And those were the vehicles that put bread on the shelf at Kroger and made that, there was no other way to get your product there. So sometimes the perception of congestion or safety or whatever for truck traffic is not factually accurate. So we've got to do a little better job too on educating the public on the value of freight and what that means to our state and our economy and what it means to the individual consumer.
I think those are wise words on which to end this session. We are, in fact, out of time. If you'll join me in thanking our panelists.